I do not like this question. This was written purely with the intent to cause errors for 95% of people. There is no reason to write this sentence the way that the correct answer writes it. It would never get past an editor. It is not a good English sentence. It was purely written as a trap for people taking the SAT. So I don't like it, but we do have a process for solving this, and the process works. You got to be careful, but it does work. So obviously they are testing apostrophes, and we can tell that because the answer choices give it away. And remember, the first step whenever we're testing apostrophes is just, do we need them, right? So is there possession, basically? And don't worry about where the apostrophe goes, right? I can tell that, the difference between choices A and B and C is that there's apostrophes before or after the S, but I'm more interested in whether the word objects needs an apostrophe at all. So I'm more thinking of choices A, B, and C kind of as the same thing, and then choice D as being the one that's different. So let's look at that, right? So starting at the end is where I like to start. Do the objects have movement, right? So to fully describe the motion of an object requires knowing each of 5 variables that characterize object's movement. So yeah, the movement belongs to the object. So that's going to get rid of D because we need a possessive indicator on this, meaning we need an apostrophe. So that gets rid of that. And again, I'm not going to worry about whether it goes before the S or after the S. Maybe that won't matter. And that's how most apostrophe questions go, is it's not even about where it goes on the word. It's about whether we need the apostrophe at all. So now I'm going to move on and focus on the fact that choice A has an apostrophe on variables and choices B and C do not. So let's see. Is the variable owning anything? To fully describe the motion of an object requires knowing each of 5 variables that characterize objects' movements. No, it doesn't work because the word that follows variables here is that. You can't possess the that here. It just doesn't make any sense. And maybe that's just, because I'm a native English speaker, that's obvious to me. I'm curious if that's not obvious to you, please put it in the comments. But it's really obvious to me that this word variables does not need any apostrophes. It's not possessing anything. Nothing belongs to the variables. It doesn't make any sense. So now that leaves me with part 2 of my apostrophes questions, which is I need to think about singular and plural, right? So I know that the difference between where that apostrophe goes usually has to do with singular and plural. Not always, but in most cases it is. Because normally when we have the apostrophe after the S, it is because the word is plural. It already ends in S. Since most plural words in English end in S, that usually indicates that it's plural. So the S at the end of the word is already part of the word. And then we're adding the apostrophe to show possession. So that's what's going on in choice B. In choice C, we don't have an S at the word already because it's a singular word. It's a singular object. And the S is coming along because that's just how we work with apostrophes. They always kind of need that S sound. So if the S isn't there already as part of the word, we're going to add it on after the apostrophe. So this is something you do need to know. But again, this is not actually what most apostrophe questions are about on the SAT. So for probably 90%, I haven't actually done the math, but that's my estimation. For about 90% of apostrophe questions, the decision we're about to make does not matter. Then for the of the 10% that are left, 9.5% of them are going to have a fairly easy decision because you'll be able to point to something in the sentence and be like, oh, it's plural, so we need to get a plural. It's singular, so we need to get a singular. You're pointing to another instance of that word in the sentence, and there's something that makes it really clear that there's either one of that thing or multiple of that thing. Here, if I follow that, I just say, oh, it's an object that's singular. Right? So I need choice C to match that, right? The object's movement. No, it's B. And this is why people keep asking me about this question, is they're like, wait, this doesn't make any sense. I'm just doing what I'm told and it's there. And yeah, so my first piece of advice before we get into why this choice C is actually a trap is don't worry about this question. Like I said, 90% of apostrophes questions are going to be just about whether we need the apostrophe at all. Not going to be about singulars and plurals. Of the remaining 10%, 9.5 of that 10% is going to be just straight up like they're going to tell you in a very clear way. This is the 0.5%. This is 1 in every 200 questions is going to have this weird thing. most of you aren't going to need to worry about that. I promise you. Just worry about getting to your 600, 700 level in reading before you worry about this little thing that might get you a 790 instead of an 800. This is not going to be the difference in your score. I promise. So what's going on here? Well, they've written a stupid sentence. And again, the SAT did this knowing that this was going to be a giant mess for everybody. To fully describe the motion of an object requires knowing each of 5 variables that characterize object's movement generally, right? So generally, any object, all objects have these 5 variables: displacement, time, initial velocity, final velocity, and acceleration. Okay. That is a statement about physics, about any object. And so it's plural because all objects have these variables. And so that's what we're referring to. Is in a way, we're referring to something here. We're talking about something that is not anywhere else in the sentence. The way I would know that is that this sentence is missing something. In order for choice C to be correct, we would need to insert a the or an right there before the word object, right? So let me read that. To fully describe the motion of an object, one object, requires knowing each of 5 variables that characterize the object's movement. Meaning now we're still talking about this one hypothetical object that we brought up earlier. But we need a word like the or an, or I guess we could do that, right? Some sort of singular thing to keep it singular, right? We're talking specifically about the object at the beginning, and now this particular object has 5 variables. And so now we are continuing to talk about this one hypothetical object, and that would be a case where C would be correct. But those words are missing, and without them, it doesn't make sense. Another way to maybe do this is maybe we can kind of flip things. I don't even know if this is going to work. To fully describe the motion of an object requires knowing each of 5 variables that characterize, we could flip it to something like the movement of objects, right? Because the word of is basically doing the same thing that an apostrophe does in English. It shows possession. Something is of something else, belongs to something else. So a lot of times on the actual SAT, they do this where they include situations where like there's 2 possessions in a sentence or in an underline, and one of the possessions is a normal apostrophe possession. The other is kind of this of, and they're trying to make you put apostrophes on the of situation, but we don't need that. The of is the apostrophe. It's kind of covering that possession idea without us needing the punctuation. So if I rephrase things here, to fully describe the motion of an object requires knowing each of 5 variables that characterize the movement of objects. Now I think it's more clear why it's plural. It's a general statement about objects in the universe. It is a physics statement. And notice I added the word the in choice B, but I did it on the movement. Movement here is singular. It's not plural here. So that's one thing we can do. Though I do think you could probably say variables that characterize the movements of objects, but you could also do that and get rid of the. Knowing each of 5 variables that characterize movements of objects. I don't love that either, but it does work. The thing is, we wouldn't want to put a the in this little spot before the objects because there are no specific objects that we're talking about in this passage. There's no multiple objects. There's one kind of hypothetical object we're talking about earlier. And so if we wanted to make a sentence that kind of refers back to that singular object, then we can use a word like the, which is kind of pointing us towards it, right? And so if I try to do the same thing with C, oh my God, this is getting messy. I could say it requires knowing each of 5 variables that characterize the movement of, I would need to say the object. This is basically what needs to happen here. Try to read this sentence without the. You can't do it. If it's a singular object, you can't do it. It just doesn't sound good. To fully describe the motion of an object requires knowing each of 5 variables that characterize the movement of object. right? It needs something. It needs a the. It needs an and. It needs a that. It needs something that's going to point us back to the singular object that we referred to earlier in the passage. It needs it. And I hope I've done enough explaining to get you there, because I'm even that has been really hard for me to put into words. It's very, very difficult. It is one of those things that I can just hear. But again, I've only spoken English my entire life. I can hear when something as subtle as a word like the is missing from something. And that's really the difference between B being right or C being right, is there's no the in C. And if we had a the, C is right. But then at that point, I think if there was a the, you could also make the case that B could be right. And so this could only go one way. It's really, really specific. And so let me just close with saying what I said earlier. This is like the 0.5% kind of trap that you're going to see for apostrophes, but really any rule could have this kind of crazy situation that is very specific to the sentence that they made, that is very unlikely to come up again, and where the SAT has basically just constructed this entire sentence for the main purpose of getting a wrong answer. That's it. This is a filter question. They are filtering out most people so that you can't get an 800. That's it. But it's not a big deal. If you're getting this wrong and you're getting everything else right, you're getting a 790, you're getting a 780. You are very, very fine. Do not worry about this question. If you are not getting a 780 or a 790, then you have other things that are a much higher priority that you need to be worried about. Make sure you're getting the passages right. Make sure you're not getting any other grammar questions wrong. This is so minor in the grand scheme of things that if you do have questions, my advice is honestly, don't even ask them. Just put this question out of your mind and go on with your life. It is not worth worrying about. It is not the kind of thing that you are at all likely to see on your SAT. And hopefully I gave you enough of an explanation to make you kind of content with that. But yeah, this is not the kind of thing that would be likely to come up ever again.